Good afternoon to all the ladies and the gentlemen in the room. Welcome to today's ACCA enrichment session for paper strategic business reporting. I hope everyone are doing well. Now, I would like to wish you who celebrate Chinese New Year. Let's all have a roaring year of the tiger that brings you good health, happiness, and prosperity. Okay, my name is Joanne, the manager of learning support for ACCA Malaysia. And together with me here is our ACCA expert tutor, Tom Clendon. Yeah. Now, Tom will tell you a little more of him later. Yeah. Now, before I hand over the session to Tom, let me run through quickly with you on the housekeeping item. We will be using the chat box to communicate with everyone. If you have any burning questions for Tom during the session, just type them in the chat box at the bottom right-hand side of the screen and select send to everyone. All right, and Tom will address your questions whenever he can. Okay. Now, all right, that's all from me. I shall now hand over the floor to you, Tom.
And my great-great-grandfather.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just get him out of the way so it's a little bit less distracting in the background. Good afternoon, everybody. Although for me, because I'm in London, or near London, it is actually a good morning. So it's great that you're all here. And the first thing that I want to do is just to start with my PowerPoint presentation. And to tell you the structure of what we're going to be doing today. So I want to start with some introductions, both of me, the exam, and hopefully you as well. But one of the things that I think is essential towards you passing the exam in March, in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, is that you use the ACCA practice platform, is that you do pass examination questions. Now, I never ask my students to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself. So you're going to see me work a question on the practice platform. Now, part of revision is about looking at current issues. Part of revision is about revising, is about making sure you know what you know. So to break up this afternoon's session, we are going to be looking at a couple of current issues. There'll be a little bit of teaching, and I hope there will be a few surprises that I'm going to throw in for you. There won't be surprises to me, but there will be surprises, I hope, to you. And then I'm going to do another question on the practice platform, so you can see what I think is an appropriate technique for gaining those easy marks, for tackling those tricky exam questions and trying to break them down. But I am aware that you will have your questions. And as Joanne has already said, as we go along, if you want to ask me a question, I do normally have access to the chat box and see it. So I'm reasonably good at multitasking, reading off a slide, reading off a chat box, talking to you, working a question. I normally can juggle. But there may well be questions of a very generic nature, and I'll save those to the end, please. So if you have questions about deferred tax, or you have questions about ACCA, or you have questions about, you know, I don't know, anything, ask me those at the end. Save those up, and we'll have a space at the end for the Q&A. If, as I'm going along, there is something that you're not clear about, then please, by all means, be a keyboard warrior. So let me tell you that I am dialing in from my hometown. I live in my hometown. I live in the road that I went to school in. And my parents are around the corner and my son is around the corner, whatever. So I'm calling you from, I'm dialing in from St Albans, which is in England. And I'm just curious to know whether you can see the chat box, whether you can use the chat box, and in fact, where in the world you are this afternoon. So if you could just share that with me, I would have the comfort of knowing that you can hear me and that you can Malaysia, Malacca. Ah, yeah, very good. Yes, drove up there once. Yeah, whereabouts in Malaysia? Okay, a lot of you are in Malaysia. It's a Malaysian event. Okay, Indonesia, very good. Yeah, I've taught out in Indonesia, Julie. Did some work at the Jakarta University there. Cebu, oh, very nice. Very nice. I hear Cebu is very nice. I've not been there. Okay, when we, fantastic. Anybody in KL? Anybody in KL? Anyway, right, I can see. Fantastic, Karen. Yeah, excellent. Nice. Okay, so you can see where the chat box is, and that's okay. That's a good thing. So let me introduce myself in a little bit more detail. My name is Tom Clendon, and like you, when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, when I was working, I studied for ACCA, and I did the exams, and for me, it was a slog. It was a long time ago, but I do remember it was a slog. I was juggling work. I was juggling studies part-time. I just got married. I had a lot going on in my life. And I was at the time that I qualified working for KPMG. However, practice for me wasn't my vocation. And I quickly fell into teaching. And I worked for a company called AT, and then we became Emil Wolf, and then we became FTC, and then we became Kaplan. And I was based in their London office. And I sort of ran basically the ACCA operation, dealing with the tutors there in the London office. And that gave me access to working with ACCA. That gave me access to all sorts of opportunities. And I used to come out to Malaysia. I started coming out to Malaysia, I think in about 1997, something like that, just before the Commonwealth Games. You had your little Bass Minis running around. And I used to work with companies on a regular basis out there. So fantastic experience. However, I left Kaplan about 8 years ago, and I went to work in Singapore. And I based myself in Singapore and worked across the region for 4 years or so. This then resulted in me coming back after 3 or 4 years. And when I came back, what I wanted to do was get involved in online stuff. All right. So I thought I'd do a bit of a portfolio, and I got myself involved in doing some stuff online with FME, Learn Online, doing a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, doing a lot of podcasting. And I'm pleased to say things like this, where I'm working directly with ACCA, supporting students. Also, I do a bit of work in the background, supporting other tutors as well. So this is me. Yeah, I am now a dedicated full-time online lecturer and have been now for the last 3 years. You can find me on LinkedIn. If we're talking about free resources, if we're talking about you fighting and scrapping for every mark, yeah, if you look at my LinkedIn, you look at my profile, you'll find articles that I have posted, links that I have posted, and you will find some valuable resources there, because the reason I'm on LinkedIn is to help students. This symbol here, this podcast symbol here, I also podcast. And if you haven't found me on podcasting, if you're into podcasting, I would seriously recommend that you just Google me with the word podcast. There's a lot of free content out there that I've done, which I know many students find useful. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. We've got 3 hours together. I could talk for 3 hours about me, but actually that's not the point, is it? All right. I'm here to help you pass the exam within the context of what we're talking about here today. I want to find out a little bit more about you, which is a slightly difficult thing to do in this context. However, we do have the ability to get you to think about polls. And there's no right or wrong answer to these questions. And these questions are confidential. I don't know who is going to answer them, and there's no tracking of it. And I'm just interested, I'm just curious as to who is dialing in this afternoon, what the makeup of our population is. So I can see that A good proportion of you have already found the poll, read it, made a decision. And I'm just going to give 5 more seconds to everybody else to make their mind up. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And these are the results. What we have here is 2/3 of you who are virgins, 2/3 of you who are coming to SBR for the first time. Fantastic. Welcome. Yeah. You're going to be in for a shock. You're going to be in for a surprise. You're going to be in for some hard work. And well done. Yeah. This is your first time. And that's the majority of people. There's a few people here who've been around the block. Yeah. Done it once before. And what they'll be thinking about is, and as a couple who've done it more than once. And if you've done SBR more than once, you need to think in your preparation about doing something different. Because if you repeat the same pattern, you'll end up with the same result. If you just do the same questions that you did last time for revision, and you do the same notes and you do the same thing, you're likely to end up with the same result. So think about, if you've done it once before or twice before, think about how you're going to do something different. Are you going to, is this part of your strategy, coming on one of these enrichment sessions as organized by ACCA? Are you going to use the polls? Are you going to use my podcast? Are you going to take advantage of that podcast? Are you going to do mock exams? Are you going to get them marked? And in fact, those things are not just good for resitters, they're good for everybody else. So yeah, we have 2/3 of our group is effectively doing it for the first time. Let's have a look at another question. And this time I'm curious about your engagement and your use of the ACCA practice platform. It's a free resource. Well, free. You've paid for it in your exam fees. You've paid for it in your student registration. It's one of the things that ACCA do, just in a way that you've paid for this session. But ACCA aren't specifically charging you as and when at the point of use. Okay, I can see that nearly everybody has voted, but there's still probably a few more. Oh boy. Oh boy. Wow. Wow. I mean, I don't know what the answer is going to be when I write these polls. I'm always curious as to find out what is going on. 10% of you have been on the ACCA practice platform a lot. And 8% of you have done SBR exam questions on the practice platform. So that's about 20% of you. Well done. I love you. Yeah, well done. You're my favorite students. Well done. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The majority of you have dabbled. Yeah, 23% of you have been honest, and I love your honesty. I appreciate your directness. 23% of you have not yet been on the ACCA practice platform. So 80% of you are a little bit unfamiliar with it. And that is going to inform me in the way that I approach the session. And that's really a dividend that you're going to get, because we're going to do 2 questions on the ACCA practice platform. And I will take that into account, certainly in the approach to my first one. I like sport, and my favorite sport is rugby. But what I'm about to say is true of cricket, is true of football, is true, I think, of all sports. When your team is playing at home, they're normally the favorite to win. Yeah? Man United win more games when they play at Old Trafford. Liverpool win more games when they play at Anfield than when they're playing away from home. This is true. You know it to be true. Now, why is that? I don't know. But it's something to do with routine. It's something to do with familiarity. It's something to do with culture and relaxation. We're at home. We know where we are. We know every blade of grass. We've practiced on this pitch before. We're in the same changing room. We're comfortable. And we can just concentrate on our football. You have got to make the ACCA practice platform your home. Because when I talk to a lot of students, I listen to a lot of students. I know I'm not listening a lot now at the moment because the way the interaction works, but when students have failed the exam, not passed the exam first time, and we begin to dig down into why that is the case and build a strategy for them to avoid repeating that failure, one of the things that I often hear is, well, I was a bit confused. The practice platform, I couldn't move on. And it becomes clear that some students are in this situation on the day of the exam. Now, because you've dialed in today, because we've got time, I know that the stats are going to be inverted and reversed. I know that your homework this weekend, yeah, what you're going to be inspired to do is, all of you, yeah, to be in that fourth bracket. Yeah, not just 8% of you, but all of you to do exam questions on the ACCA practice platform. Because trust me, if you do that, you are increasing your chances of passing the exam. It is as simple as that. Yeah, it's very difficult for you to pass the exam unless you've practiced those kind of questions. Right, so most of us are first timers. Most of us haven't been on the ACCA practice platform much. And this is now a third poll about your learning style, about your sense of the right way to go about business. They're all good statements. They're all good statements. So it's a relative issue, isn't it? It's a relative issue. Because you do need to have some definitions, you do need to have some numerical ability, and you do need to have a breadth of knowledge. And this is one where I'm just giving you another 5 seconds. 5, 3, 4, 1, 2. Wow. I am pleased that being numbers, being numerate is not key to passing SBR. That is absolutely true. It sort of may have been true for P2. It sort of may have been true in the past that being good at numbers was somehow the important thing with a number crunching question, but actually that's not the case at SBR. It's that breadth of knowledge, that application, that ability to discuss that is so key. A little bit of rote learning is a good thing. A little bit of rote learning is a good thing, but you're never, ever, ever going to pass this exam if all you do is be a Google, if all you do is repeat and rote learn stuff and regurgitate it out. So yeah, those are the polls. And thank you very much for participating in those polls. That's interesting to me. And that, as I say, that helps inform what we're going to be doing today. Now, I'm going to run through this very, very quickly. If I say anything talking about the format and talking about the SBR exam that is different or you disagree with, please use the chat box, because this should be a gentle ride. Yeah? Of course, there's an overlap with FR. even at SBR, we start dealing with things like revisions, things like impairment, things which you have done before. There's no choice. Just like when you turn up at work and you get told to do some work, you don't have a choice about it. It's the same in the exam as well. You've got a 3-hour, 15-minute period. I don't think that you read the exam for 15 minutes and then you start. You start straight away. Yeah? You've got a 10-minute kickoff. There's 10 minutes in the exam before the exam starts for you to read all of the instructions. But if you've been on the practice platform, you've read those instructions time and time again, and you don't need to read them on the day of the exam. So I know what I would do in the exam. I know what I would do. I'd get there. I would have read the instructions time and time again beforehand. And I would sit there during that 10-minute phase. And after about 3 minutes, 4 minutes, after I've done a bit of breathing, I would then press start. And if you don't press start, after 10 minutes, it starts automatically. But I would want to be in control of when I started. I'd wait for the clock to go round. I'd know exactly when I was about to start. Then you've got 3 hours, 15 minutes after reading the instructions. Of course, it's a computer-based exam. Yeah, there are variants. I guess you're doing the international. You should be doing the international. The international is easier. If anybody, is anybody doing the UK variant? Is anyone at all out there doing the UK variant? Please use the chat box. Nobody is. Good. So I wouldn't have expected you to. It's 100 marks. It's section A, section B. Question 1's on groups. Well, when I say question 1's on groups, that's too general, really. Group accounts are examined. Could be cash flow, could be foreign currency, could be goodwill, could be impairment, loads of stuff. But you'll also have something else within the question. Yeah, and it's an explanation question as well. Question 2 is ethics, and I want to have a look at that. For me, ethics is the question where you can do well. Yeah, I think ethics is, if you're taught it, this is where I'm going to try and add a little bit of value today by looking at ethics and standards. And in section B, who knows what's going to be in section B? There's certainly going to be a surprise. I am not tipping the exam. It's not possible to tip the exam. Some of you might do the exam in the morning. Some of you might do the exam in the afternoon. Some of you might do the exam in Malaysia. Some of you might do the exam in a different time zone. ACCA know this. So there's a bank of questions. Maybe up to 3 different exams are percolating around. So you may actually not even do the same exam as the friend sitting next to you in the same exam center. So it's a curious thing. I can't tip the exam. I can't say, oh, this topic is definitely coming up. I can't do that. It's like, it's not the case. What I can look at is themes. What I can look at is rivers that run through the exam and the syllabus. You're not a number crunching, accounts preparation book clerk. You are a highly paid, highly skilled accountant. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we're preparing you for in the exam. To have judgment and communication skills as well as technical ability, so that you're explaining to somebody else, fellow board member, your accounting manager, you're explaining to them, no, the pension accounting is done differently. It's done this way. And why? Why? So stakeholder perspective is really important. We don't prepare accounts to hang them out in a gallery for people to go and look at and admire like a work of art. No one looks at the accounts because they're beautiful. They look at the accounts for a very specific practical reason. Anyway, you know this. Yeah, you know this. I did a poll recently on LinkedIn. And the poll that I did was to ask my followers what advice effectively they would give to people doing the exam in March. And very, very clear, yeah, that the majority, the 91% of answers were question practice, question practice. When you're learning, when you're in the tuition phase, your brain is a sponge and you're absorbing more information in. Yeah. It's like a fighter in the gym. They're building their muscles. But the nearer you get to the exam, the more you've got to not put more water and knowledge into your brain. You've got to be able to get it out. You've got to be able to apply it. You've got to be able to use it. Now, I'm talking in very abstract terms here. We are about to dive in and get dirty. We are about to have a little go at a question on the practice platform. Now, before we do this, I'm just going to pause for 1 minute and just see whether there are any particular questions or observations arriving in respect of anything that I have already just said. Because the introductions are over, the fun and games are over, and we're now about to deep dive into a specific exam question, which I'm about to find on the ACCA practice platform. But at the same time, I just want to clear my throat. Yes, I have been triple jabbed. No, I haven't got COVID. And what I'm wanting to do is a new share. And I'm wanting to go online, and I'm wanting to not go on FME online at the moment. I'm wanting to go on the ACCA practice platform. And you're probably familiar with the way this kind of works. Most of you are, some of you are anyway. And here I am. Now at this stage, I'm just going to minimize the chat box. And I am looking for an exam paper. And the exam paper that we're going to have a look at to begin with is the September-December 20 exam. And we're going to have a little look at the September-December 20 exam. Now, this is the sort of thing that we're faced with. We need to move on, and I'm not going to do sugar. Sugar is a horrible question, very detailed number crunching question. This is the question I want to have a look at. We are now on the hour. All right, we are now on the hour. All right, I want you to be aware of that. Actually, no, let me take the pressure off myself. Let me take the pressure off you. I'm aware that not everybody is as familiar with the practice platform as they might be. Now, there's all sorts of things you can do with the practice platform. If you play with it, you've got a scratch pad. And I never use it because to me, the examiner never will see this. You're not allowed to take paper in the exam. And I personally don't see the functionality of that at a strategic professional exam. You've got a calculator. So if you want to use a calculator, yeah, you've got a calculator there that you can use, whether it's scientific or standard. So again, you can take a calculator into the exam, provided it's not programmable. And you've got blurb of information here, right? Blurb of information. And what if you want to do so, you can highlight information, yeah, and you can, yeah, highlight it like that if you want to, all right? Or you can highlight information here. I don't know why you would want to strike it through. I don't use that functionality. And you've just got to play a little bit so that you're comfortable with how things are. Now, it is just gone past the hour. So let's start playing with what we're looking at here. And we look at the requirements. Now, the first thing that I do in every exam is not read the requirement, which is a bit shocking, really. But I Control C, and what I do is I dump it into the why is that still there? I dump it into the word response area. So you can see that when you do that, you've lost your formatting, right? You've lost your formatting. So you have to spend a few moments briefly just reformatting the question. So we can now see what we're being asked. We're being asked 3 separate things in this particular question. There are 3 requirements. And those requirements are to A, discuss how Clendon should have accounted for the sale of the apartment in accordance with revenue. So we've got an accounting standard revenue, and we've got an accounting standard on borrowing costs. We've got 2 different accounting standards that we're being asked. Now, this is for 5 marks. If it's for 5 marks, then this is roughly 8 minutes that we've got to answer that question. Then we've got to provide the accounting entries, for what should have gone on in respect of the sale at the 2-year period. So we've got some numbers to do, although interestingly enough, in the response areas, we haven't got the spreadsheet functionality. And then in part C, we've got ethics. Now, for me, I can only deal with one thing at a time. And in this particular question, we do have exhibits. We've got apartment blocks. We've got stuff around the chief accountant and the distributed ledger. So exhibit number 1 is going to relate to, the information in the first part of the question. So you will get used to this, but you've got to be relatively aggressive. You can't afford to read the whole requirement, the whole question, and then think about where you start. Part A relates to the first exhibit. Let's get on with discussing how Clendon should have accounted for the sale of the apartment blocks, in accordance with this information. And you can see that we've got the ability to make that information slightly bigger, slightly smaller. We can manipulate the size of the screen, But what I like to try and do is have the 2 side by side. That's the way I operate. Clendon builds apartment blocks. So we are Clendon. We are building apartment blocks, and they take 2 years to complete. All right, they take 2 years to complete. From the date that we sign the contract. The title and possession, and therefore control of the apartment blocks, pass on completion. So we've got here a situation where control is passing upon completion of the construction. Control passes on completion of the construction. It takes 2 years to build. The price on completion is 9.55. So the price on completion is 9.55, or they can pay 8.5. They can pay 8.5, on the day the contract is signed. So there's 2 different prices, one at the beginning and one 2 years later. The chief accountant has calculated that this represents a borrowing rate of 6%. Now, all of this information, every single word of this information is relevant. Clendon immediately recognizes 8.5 million revenue if the customers pay when they sign the contract. Now, I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to start writing out there are 5 steps under, and the step 1 is, and step, no. We need to cut to the chase. And what we've got here, I think, is an issue around both the timing and the measurement of revenue. We've also got an issue around the fact that the standard the question does something which is going to be wrong. Now, if I'm going to answer this question, I'm going to plan it that we deal with revenue and we deal with borrowing costs. Now, I want to get the name of the company in very early on, and I want to establish not a definition, but a procedure. Yeah, Calibra should recognize the revenue from the sale when control passes. In other words, when the performance obligation is completed. Now, what they've done is clearly wrong, yeah? This will be when the 2 years are up and the title passes. It is not when the cash is received. It is not when the cash is received on the contract. That is wrong. Yeah, that is wrong. So the right thing to do is would be to say what? Well, if you've received money for something that you haven't done, you've then got an obligation to do it. You haven't sold it. So you might say something along the following lines, and there is a borrowing rate being mentioned. The substance is that the lower money, it's 8.5, isn't it? The substance is the 8.5 million received is a loan, a liability on which interest, finance cost, yeah, should be accrued over time. Yeah, you borrowed money at 5%. So I think that's almost enough there on the revenue. If I want to talk about borrowing costs, then borrowing costs are normally written off, aren't they? Finance costs are normally expensed to P&L. Yeah, they are a period expense. But actually, that's not always the case, is it? Because if you've borrowed money specifically for a project to finance the construction of an asset, you capitalize the interest. I mean, this is FR, isn't it? However, if the monies are borrowed to finance the construction of a qualifying asset, then the interest is capitalized. All right. Now I'm looking at my time, it's 9 minutes past. So I've used up my time here for this answer. I've got to move on. I've talked about revenue. I've talked about borrowing costs. Yeah. And I've got to now provide the accounting entries. Now, the accounting entries could be done in a journal form. The accounting entries could be done in a table. But the first thing is that we have cash in, and the cash in is 8.5 million. So we've got more cash. So we've got more cash by 8.5, and we've got more liability, and that liability is 8.5. Because we've got a liability, because we've received the money 2 years before we're going to sell it. You can't recognize the revenue when you've, if you're an airline business and someone pays you money for an airline ticket a year in advance, the money you receive, you can't say that is the sale today. You can't recognize the cash as revenue today because you haven't delivered anything. And it's the same here. Only because it's 2 years, we've got interest. Now, the amount of interest that we've got going is 6%. 6% on what? 6% on 8.5. So we can use our calculator and we can take 6% on 8.5. And if we take 6% on 8.5, we then get 0.51. So we get 6% on 8.5, and that gives me 0.51. But it's for 2 years, and it will then have compound interest. So it would be 6% on 9.01. Yeah, I can do that in my head. So you've got there, let's clear that. So we're looking at 6% on a memory like a sieve, but I think it was 8.51. Let me just go back, double check. As I say, memory like a sieve. 9.01, isn't it? Yeah, 9.01. My mistake, my procrastination. So let me go clear, 9.01, and we're multiplying that by 6%. And therefore we get a number which doesn't make sense because I have messed up once. And when you mess up once, you tend to mess up twice, 9.01 times. So it's a live experience, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. And therefore this is giving you 0.54 as a finance cost. That is giving you there 0.54, 0.54. And that would then give you a total of 9.55 when you add the two interests on. So what do we do with the interest? We've got more of an expense. You've got more of an expense of, if I add those two numbers together in my head, that is 1.05. And we have got more of a liability. And the more of the liability is 1.05. Now, the final thing we do is we recognize the revenue at the end of the 2-year period. We recognize the revenue at the end of the 2-year period by de-recognizing. We de-recognize the liability. So we remove the liability, and the liability, which was in the first place 8.5, has now gone up by 1.05. So the liability is now 9.55. We're getting rid of that liability, and we recognize the revenue. We recognize the revenue, and the revenue that we recognize is therefore 9.55, which is the amount of money that somebody would pay if they just bought it when it was ready. But if they were prepared to pay 2 years earlier, time value of money, they give us a smaller sum of money. Now, time out here, time out. I have spent 13 minutes on this question so far. Time out, time out. This answer, I'm not gonna play with. All right. When I look at this answer, I've given it a little subheading of revenue, and I've given it a little subheading of borrowing costs, because there are 2 parts to the 5-mark question. Most of the marks, 3 marks, I'm suggesting, would be for the revenue, and 2 marks would be for the borrowing costs. I would like to think this is worth 5 out of 5. If I was harsh, maybe 4 out of 5. But I've tried to say 5 things. They had what should they do? What they've done is wrong, and the substance is that it's a loan. Now, the fact that this is spelt wrong, the fact that that is spelt wrong really doesn't bother me whatsoever. It's clear what it means, received. Yeah, I'm not going to spend time going back over it. Borrowing costs, there's no references to paragraph numbers. He's already told us his ISA 23 in the question. There are no marks for talking about the number of the standard. Finance costs are normally expensed to P&L. They're a period expense, fine. However, if monies, so again, the word is, the meaning is clear. Our finance, then the interest is capitalized during the period of construction. So yeah, maybe that would be something I could go in and just make it a little bit clearer during the period of construction. But I think there's 2 out of 2 there. I'm very comfortable with that. Now, this is 3 marks for the entries. Now, some of you may be upset by what I've done here, but I want to tell you that the requirement of the question was to provide the accounting. It wasn't the journals. Now, in the examiner's answer, there are journals. And of course, those of you who are comfortable with debits and credits know that when you've got more cash, you've got more of an asset, and that's a debit. And when you've got more of a liability, that is a credit. And if you want to present your answer as debit and credit, respect, well done, fine, perfect. But if you want to say that what you've got is interest, which is both an expense and increases the liability, and you express it in that way, respect, no problem, well done. It's fine. A marker can clearly understand what you have done. You will get the marks. Yeah? And so this for me is 3 out of 3. There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that we have got 3 out of 3 for showing the entries. In fact, even if you'd made a mistake in calculating the interest, and if you'd said, and you'd only done 1 year, I'd still give you 3 out of 3. I still would have done. Yeah, providing, hang on a minute, is this worth 3 out of 3 more expense? Yeah, maybe what we should be doing here is saying more asset. Yeah, maybe what we should be saying here is more asset, because the interest is capitalized. So yeah, I can always improve my answers. So, what was I looking at here? I was looking at a question which was 5 marks, 8 marks. The answer I gave you was 7 marks, 6 marks, 7. No, it's now 7 marks. I'm happy. Yeah, I have to fight myself not to give you a better answer. Because if I give you too good an answer, it's unrealistic. I'm trying to give you an answer that I can produce within the time allowed using the ACCA practice platform. And that means you see a few warts. You see me make a mistake or two, a slip or two, a spelling mistake, a little here, a little there. This is not the examiner's answer. This is a live answer that I'm producing, because I know that's what you've got to do in the exam, take an original question and have a go at it. So I'm just pausing here for a moment. You are very patient and very quiet. I am about to move on and have a look at the rest of the question. But before I do so, I'm just going to have a slurp of tea, and I'm wondering whether you are still there. If you're still there, can you press a little Y? That's kind of you to put a Y in. That's kind of you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Wan. Thank you, Sanika. Very good. Very, very good. Okay. All right. So, let me effectively move on and have a look at the next requirement of the question. And the next requirement of the question is part C. And what we've got here for part C is 12 marks. Now, I use a multiple of 1.8, which is slightly tight, if I'm honest. But if I use a multiple of that, I'm looking here at 22 minutes. So I've got here 12 marks. And 12 marks is 22 minutes. And it is 21 minutes past. So that is what, 43? So we would then be at 43 minutes past the hour. Now, what we've got to do is discuss the way the chief accountant should have acted to ensure he maintained ethical standards. So it's an ethics question, dealing with the events and issues described in Exhibit 2 and in Exhibit 3. Now, Calibra operates in this blockchain world. They've got exhibits, apartment blocks, relationship, distributed ledger. We've got our response areas, which includes the requirements. That's what we're doing. And we've got 2 professional marks. Now, it's difficult to sort of directly earn the professional marks. You can't have a heading called professional marks, and this is where I'm getting them. It is going to be about us trying to polish things and make sure we relate to the material in the question. So, discuss the way the chief accountant should have acted in the way he maintained ethical standard with the issue described in Exhibit 2 and in Exhibit 3. So we've got an issue around Exhibit 2, and we've got an issue around Exhibit 3. And I'm assuming that they're 5 marks each. Yeah. So I'm assuming that they are sort of self-standing. So let's have a look at the chief accountant and Bonini and see what is going on here. The chief accountant doesn't hold a permanent position. So the chief accountant is temporary, all right, which means maybe they don't care about the business as much. They're just here today, gone tomorrow. They've applied for a position on a permanent basis. So they'll want the job. They're going to be interviewed in the near future. So they want the job. They want to impress. That's the idea. Bodini is a customer who wants to take advantage of the 8.5 million reduced price, but was having problems with cash flow. The chief accountant, he's the one who doesn't hold the permanent job, therefore allowed Bodini to pay 8.5 million and to delay the payment for a month. Well, that's nice of him, isn't it? Here's a month's credit. You're supposed to pay the 8.5 million straight away. And what the chief accountant is, it's okay, mate. I'll give you a month's credit, but I'll still keep it at the same price. I won't add on 6%. In return, the chief accountant has just done the customer a favor. I'll give you 1 month's credit. In return, they've agreed to provide a good employment reference. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. The chief accountant was afraid, fear, don't like fear, that he might lose Bodini as a customer. Okay. If he's worried about losing them as a customer, I get that. That's why you would be nice to them. And referee. Ooh, and referee. Yeah. So there's mixed feelings there about why he may have done that favor. And we're looking here at ethical issues. We're looking here at ethical issues. Sorry, just seeing the chat. Yes, Julie, that is correct. Thank you, Mohammed there, 8.5 plus the 5, 8, yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. Thank you on the chat. Right, let's have a look at Exhibit 2. What have we got going on here? So the chief accountant, I think, has an ethical dilemma in the sense that when he's dealing with Bedini, is he dealing with them on a commercial basis, or is he dealing it reflecting his self-interest and wanting a good reference from them? And I think we have to kind of acknowledge the lack of black and white. This is definitely a gray area. So the chief accountant, and I can't be bothered to keep on calling him that, so I'm just going to call it CA. The chief accountant has an ethical dilemma in that he is dealing with a customer and has to decide the best course of action that is in the best interest of his employer, and also has to be aware of the personal advantage that this might bring. What's the pillar? Because I'm not starting this answer, I'm not getting involved in this answer by listing out the 5 ethical pillars, but which pillar here am I going to tie this dilemma into? What's the pillar? What's the ethical issue? Is this confidentiality? No. Is this competence? No. Would anybody like to say on the chat what pillar we're going to tie this into initially? Objectivity, thank you very much. Objectivity, thank you very much. Objectivity, thank you very much. Yeah. The chief accountant needs to act with objectivity in order to maintain ethical behavior standards. Yeah. So, you know, that's what we've got to do. That's what we've got to do. And the decision should therefore be made, the decision to grant a 1-month extension should be made for the right commercial reasons. If the decision is made purely to curry favor with Bodini and to get a favorable reference, this is unethical. Because, well, why? What's the what would be the unethical thing about that? What would be unethical there? So that wouldn't be good professional behavior, would it? It would show a lack of integrity. Yeah. So we're tying it in, yeah, because this would be this would not be professional behavior, as has been mentioned on the chat. This would not be professional behavior and show a lack of integrity. Yeah, it wouldn't be the sort of the honest thing to do. Now, Have I exhausted what I'm about to say? I think I almost have, but discuss the way in which they should have acted. So I think I need to talk about what he should have done. So what should you do? What should you do? Yeah. So maybe there's another issue here about actions, what we should do. Now, I think what he should have done, well, it's a dilemma, isn't it? Well, what do you do? I think you need to get someone else involved to rubber stamp and validate what you're doing. So you're not doing it on your own. Yeah. The chief accountant should have discussed this, issue with a colleague. The chief accountant has a self-interest in the decision. It may well be the right commercial decision to grant the 1 month further credit, but the chief accountant needs to ensure it is not done secretly to protect, not done secretly, right, full stop, right, okay, bish, bash, bosh. I'm happy with that. And if I go back, I think I could even do a little subheading here and highlight the fact that we are talking about objectivity. And I think we can subtotal it here, that we are talking about professional behavior and integrity. And when I look at the answer, when I stand back and look at what I've created this time, it is for 5 marks. Because we've just dealt with exhibit 2. It is for 5 marks. And we've had a bit of an introduction. We've got to be ethical. We're in a situation. And we've tied it into objectivity. We've tied it into integrity and professional behavior. And we've talked about actions. And I don't think there's anything more I want to add to that. And the risk of adding more to it and polishing it more and correcting the mistakes, the risk is I run out of time. And instead of trying to get the 5th mark, I need to get the 1st mark of the next stage. All right. And we haven't even read about this. Now, look at me. I'm a teacher. Yeah. I'm not in business. I'm not working for an cutting IT company. I know nothing about distributed ledger technology. I know nothing about blockchain. But the question isn't about blockchain. If I said the decision is to be done in the best interest of the directors, instead of ensuring, is that correct? If I'd said the decision are to be done in the best interest of the directors, instead of ensuring it done secretly, is that correct? The point is, I think that you never make a decision always for one reason, and you've got to make it clear in this case that it is ethical to give them the 1 month's credit if the judgment is that keeps the customer and that's the correct commercial decision that benefits the company. If the reason for giving the 1 month's credit is to curry favor and to get a good reference, that's unethical behavior. So it's a genuine dilemma. There's not a simple black or white answer. The chief accountant is definitely acting unethically, or the chief accountant is definitely a perfect saint and a brilliant person. It's neither. We're discussing reality. And so I think it's very important that we make it clear that it can be unethical. It can be showing a lack of integrity if they keep it a secret, because they're then open to abuse, that they have done that for their own interest. What I would do in that situation is I would say, oh, crumbs, I've got an ethical dilemma. I've got self-interest here. Let me sort of hand over a bit of the responsibility to somebody else. Let me share my concerns. Let me get an input of another party. They then validate the commerciality of the decision, and then it's okay. Does that help? CKK. Yeah, are we all right with that? I've taken a little bit of a timeout. Excellent, good question. All right, so let's have a look at the. Let's have a look at where we are. It's 36 past, and we've got here 43. I'm going to give myself another minute because of the question there, and otherwise can discuss with anyone. I think it needs to be discussed within the organization. I don't think this is get advice from ACCA or get legal advice. It's about the board. It's because it's a commercial decision. Has this been done in the past? You know, would you grant the 1 month's credit to the customer if it wasn't for the reference? And if the answer is yes, it should be granted. If the answer is the only reason we're granting the extension is because you want a favorable reference, then that's unethical. Is that okay, Bobby? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Let me set the clock again, but I'm aware that I've taken a little bit of a time out there, but I don't want to hang around too long. What is the requirement of the question again? We are discussing the way that they should have acted. In other words, they probably acted incorrectly to maintain ethical standards. Cleaver has recently used distributed ledger technology, blockchain. So these things are scary words. I don't fully understand them. Yeah, I don't fully understand them. They're scary words, and it puts me on edge about competence, because we're dealing here with cutting edge stuff. Transactions only visible. Chief accountant publicly supports the technology. Hey, chief accountant is publicly supporting the technology. However, he has private concerns. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. Yeah. To say one thing in public and to think another thing in private is hypocrisy. He is concerned about the potential violation of local regulations. So he's concerned over whether or not they're reliable. Are they reliable? Now, the directors want to push ahead. They want to push ahead. The chief accountant has very basic knowledge. The chief accountant, there's an issue of integrity. There's an issue of competence here. The issue of competence. They have a basic knowledge. This is a chief accountant. But he has assured the directors that he can facilitate the move. That sounds a bit BS, doesn't it? That sounds like he doesn't really know very much, but he doesn't want to lose face. The project's been approved despite the private reservations. The chief accountant has recently qualified. That ties into competence. That ties into inexperience. And of course, they wish employment. So again, you've got this issue, which I could bring out again. You know, there's a threat to their independence and objectivity. But what screams at me is competence. What screams at me is competence. It is noted that the chief accountant is recently qualified and only has a basic knowledge of this new technology. One ethical issue to be considered is whether or not the chief accountant has the competence and experience to do the job. Now, it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because how do you get the experience with new technology? Because you can't, because it's new technology. And you know, you can't blame someone for being newly qualified. It may be appropriate. It may be appropriate for the chief accountant to get training in this area to bring him up to speed. But the chief accountant has not disclosed his lack of experience and has assured the board he can do the job. This seems to be unethical, as the chief accountant is not telling the whole truth. To the board. Indeed, he's also hiding his private reservations. This may be because he wants to secure employment with the company. There are real risks. There are real risks involved for the company, as if the systems fail, then they will be in breach of local law, of local regulations, and presumably fined or closed down. Yeah, I don't know, something like that. I mean, to me, I've gone a little bit blurb there. That is not as neatly separated out in terms of actions. I suppose I could recap on the actions. He should disclose, yeah. Yeah, should be honest about his reservations. Should be honest about his reservations about the systems and his lack of experience. Maybe training should be arranged, something like that. Whew, time out. Let's have a look. 44. Yeah, I've got to 44. Where were we previously? I was trying to get to 43 minutes past. So, you know, I've had a minute or two of dealing with questions. So I feel roughly that we're kind of on track for an answer. And let me just make sure, let me read it once through. It's noted the chief accountant briefing qualifies only a basic knowledge of new technology. One ethical issue is whether, yeah, or not has competence and experience to the job. Competence is a key ethical. May be appropriate that you get into training in this area to bring him up to speed. but the chief accountant has not disclosed his lack of experience and assured the board he can do the job. This seems unethical. And the chief accountant not telling the whole truth and due to also hiding his present reservations. Yeah, this shows a lack of integrity. Let's tie it in. This shows a lack of integrity. Yeah, so we're tying that in. This may be because he wants to secure employment, so he's got a conflict of interest. There are real risks involved for the company, as if the systems fail, yeah, then they will be in breach of local regulation and presumably fined or closed down. Actions, should be honest about the reservations, maybe training should be arranged. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with that. I always give it one very quick read, one, you know, look at the clock, awareness of what's going on. And there you have it. I've done it in real time. I've done it to the best of my ability. At the same time as taking the odd time out and talking to you. This is a, 20-mark question. And as a 20-mark question, you've got, about 40 minutes to answer the question. And that's what I have been doing in answering the question. Now, in several little minor points that I can talk about, if you're doing this as an exercise and you're wanting to hand it in to your tutor for marking or to show your friend, then if you see this button here, yeah, that enables you to effectively save your answer. So this is how my answer looks. Yeah. So this is a 20-mark question. You can see there's lots of white space. For God's sake, make sure that your answer has white space in it. So you're challenging the marker to earn a mark, to give a mark on each little mini paragraph. It's much more visually. So you can see there in the time, this is how far I've got. You would then be able to save that, yeah, to your own little local computer. All right. And then having saved it, you've then got it to send in for marking. Yeah. So this is what you can do. This is what you can do. Yeah. So this is the question of Calibra. This is from the September-December 20 exam. So the ACCA do release sometimes some of their exams. And as I say, the answer that I've produced, you've seen me produce it, not the examiner's answer. Yeah, and every time I do it, I do produce a slightly different answer with slightly different words. But there we go. There we have it. And I'm trying to demonstrate to you exam technique, not just simply show you an answer. I've done what I've done my best. I've done what you have to do. I don't want to do anything that I don't want to ask you to do something that I couldn't do myself. Now I'm pausing for a minute because I'm going to suggest that we take a comfort break, in that we've done some introductions and that we have looked at our first question. But just before we take that comfort break, are there any questions or direct observations around Calibra or the ethical question that I have just addressed? Okay, welcome back from the break. I think it's always important during revision and whilst we're working to make sure that we do stand up and we do drink water and we do have a little bit of a break, and that's a good thing. Before we kind of get going again with the main event, thank you all of you who have connected with me on LinkedIn. I've just been checking my phone and there's quite a few of you have made connections with me on LinkedIn. And something I didn't particularly mention, but I also do Instagram. So, you know, I would encourage you, I would invite you to contact me on LinkedIn or on Instagram, if that's your thing. On Instagram, I am Tom. I'm Tom _Clendon _SBR, something like that. I do have an unusual name, Clendon, and if you connect Clendon, Clendon, with, you go into Google and connect that with ACCA or SBR, you'll find me. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing in the early next week is a free prize draw. And I'll be doing one on LinkedIn and I'll be doing one on Instagram. And I'll be doing a free prize draw for one of my courses, for my mock exam course to help you pass SBR in March. So if you want to have the opportunity of winning a free mock exam, yeah, that is set on the ACCA practice platform, that I will mark, yeah, that you will get a video of me debriefing it, that you will get feedback as to what you've done well and how you can improve. You'll be joining my WhatsApp group and you'll be getting a few extras. So, you know, you'll be getting the current issues around sustainability reporting, around cryptocurrencies, around COVID, around crowdfunding. You'll be getting all of those, yeah, as well as being part of my WhatsApp group. So the way to be part of that draw is to sign up on LinkedIn with me, or to sign up on Instagram with me, and then I will be advertising on those platforms. So from a long-term perspective, there's more content that I put out on LinkedIn than I put out on Instagram, but actually I've got far many LinkedIn followers than I have Instagram followers. So your chances of winning are greater on the Instagram, but you should follow me on LinkedIn anyway for the content around the tips, and not the what's coming up in the exam, but study tips and content on LinkedIn anyway. As young professionals, you should be on LinkedIn. It's the social media. Instagram's a bit of fun. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. What I want to do is to sort of get back in the process, and we've had a look at our first exam question on the practice platform. We've got another one coming up in a minute. But I just did want to spend some time with you teaching you something, refreshing you on an area of current issues, which is around crowdfunding. So you might need a pen and paper to hand at some stage, because I'm going to ask you some questions on this, and you might have to do a little bit of work on this. Crowdfunding is a way of getting money from the crowd. In the old days, if you wanted money, you'd go to a bank, or in the old days, if you wanted money, you'd go to the stock exchange and raise it in the form of equity. These days, however, the internet provides disintermediation, where we can connect directly to providers of finance. If you want to WhatsApp me for details of things and links and stuff, then you can WhatsApp me. I'm not going to put you in a WhatsApp group unless you're part of one of my courses, but my WhatsApp number is quite widely available out there, Doreen. And that is my WhatsApp number. And if you WhatsApp me direct, I can send you direct links to my LinkedIn, direct links to my Instagram, direct links to couple of other resources, my podcast, if you find that easier. So if you want to engage with me on a one-to-one basis on WhatsApp, please do so. That is my number there. But let me, for now, concentrate on crowdfunding. Yeah, let me, for now, concentrate on crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is disintermediation. Crowdfunding is using the internet to get money. Now, the point is that when you do get money, you've then got to think about how you account for it. And the problem with crowdfunding is there isn't an IFRS on crowdfunding. And so this is why the examiner, there has been a question on this. I've been talking about crowdfunding now for 18 months, and it has cropped up in a question, but that question has not been published. And that question effectively, right, let me go back. Seems to be a problem with my screen share. Is that better? Joanne?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for pointing that out. Excellent.
Right.
I was talking about what is crowdfunding. I was talking about the fact that crowdfunding is disintermediation. We're getting money directly from strangers, you know, directly over the internet, rather than going to one bank or rather than going to the market. So we're getting it from a variety of sources. Now, what makes it interesting from an SBR perspective is there is no standard. Now, this has already been examined. It was examined recently, and I have been talking about this for some time, but the question has not been published. So that question, you know, the numbers could be doubled, the name could be changed, and that could reappear in the March exam or one of the March exams that you could be sitting. And so it'd still be a surprise. And the ACCA are very sophisticated over the how they do that. So just because a current issue has been examined once these days doesn't mean to say it's not going to come up again. Cryptocurrencies, for example, has come up 4 or 5 times and may well come up for another 4 or 5 times in slightly different forms. And certainly crowdfunding, I think, fits into that category. So the examiner, when he sets you a question on crowdfunding, is making you think, because there isn't a definition. There isn't a standard. You're in an unknown situation. It's like live sport. You don't know what's going to happen next. And so you need to fall back on your basic skills. You need to fall back and analyze it from a framework perspective, from a first principles perspective. Money's come in, debit cash. Money's come in, debit cash. But where's that money come from? Why have you got that money? Now, there are only 5 elements. Yeah. So you've got assets, which are debit. So we're debiting cash. All right. It's not an expense. So you've got a credit. You've only got one of 3. It's either income. You've made a sale. It's either a liability. So you've got to pay the money back, or you've given shares in the company. There's one of 3. Yeah. And if it's revenue, we've got an accounting standard. And if it's liability, IFRS 15, if you've got a loan or an equity instrument, it's IFRS 9. All right. So the mindset is money comes in from the crowd. Why have we been given the money? And you then are thinking which route we go down. So you could argue that crowdfunding is not about crowdfunding as such. It's about revenue recognition. It's about financial instruments. Yeah. Because when you receive money, you've either made a sale, you've got an obligation to pay it back, or you've given away some shares. I would like you to read this, please. I would like you to read this information for the next 1 minute. I'm going to say nothing for a minute, just to give you an opportunity. Right, let's have a look at what we're being asked to do. Let's have a look at the information that we've been given. So we're just before the year end, and there's a crowdfunding campaign, and we've set out we've got $100,000 coming in. Got $100,000 coming in. Now we charge 10%. So although the gross amount of money coming in is 100, actually the platform, the agent, has taken out 10%, has taken out 10,000. Now everybody who pays $100 gets, so the customer, the individual who pays $100 gets two things. They get a kit and a mock. They get a kit, they get a physical thing, and they get a mock. And at the reporting date, all the kits have been dispatched, but none of the mocks have yet been marked. The marking service hasn't yet kicked in. It's just before the year end. Now, the revision kit and the exam marking service can be purchased individually. You might want to make a note of those key numbers. So it's $100. There's a 10% cut. And individually, the kit is 90, as the kit is 60, and the mock exam is 90. And, you know, I hope you're ahead of the game here. Can you use the chat and tell me, why have we received the money? What's the accounting standard involved? What's the accounting standard? What are we really being tested on here? Yeah, it's revenue. It's IFRS 15. Absolutely. Thank you, Ong. Yeah, thank you, Chow. Absolutely. Yeah, of course it is. And the reason we've got the money is because we've made a sale and we've incurred some costs in making the sale. And so this now moves away from being crowdfunding and moves into a revenue recognition issue. And what you've got happening is an unbundling, because you've got two distinct performance obligations. Yeah, you've got an unbundling because you've got two distinct performance obligations. One is around the kit and one is around the marking. How much revenue can we recognize this year? How much revenue can we recognize this year? Do you have a pen and paper there? Do you have good mental maths? Do you have a calculator there? Can you spend a moment just thinking and calculating one number, and that number that I'm after is the revenue that someone received 100,000 and we've received 90,000. Of that, how much is revenue? 40K is being offered up. Someone's quick. Ty's very quick. 40K. Let's see a few more people make a contribution before I reveal. NG says 4,000. Any more? Just Yuen says 40K. So there's an element of sort of consistency amongst the three people who've been brave enough to have a go, reveal their hand. Wassam, yeah, okay, 37, interesting. Presumably that's to do with a different treatment of the 10 grand. Someone is replying only to the hosts, saying 30. So is it 40? Is it 30? Is it 37? Just another minute for the rest of us. If you want to play, if you want to have a go, how do you unbundle? Is this FR? Is this SBR? It's both. It's both. If you did FR, you would have learned this, but not in the context of crowdfunding. It would have been a little multiple choice question. So let me think about constructing an explanation for the answer. Basically, because the performance of, basically there's one lot of money being received for two performance obligations. And one performance obligation has been met in full, which is the kit, and one has not been met, which is the exam marking service. So we've got to identify the sale. We've got to identify the two performance obligations and the fact that we've met one, and we've got to allocate the transaction price, and the transaction price is 100, not 90. We've got to allocate the transaction price to the two performance obligations in proportion to their standalone prices. So the revision kit, which we have done, is 60 1/50ths. Yeah, is 60 1/50ths of the overall, whereas the marking service is slightly more valuable, and that revenue that we've already got, that's going to be deferred. So 60 50ths of 100, I think. So in understanding this, yeah, we've made a sale. There are 5 steps. We've got to unbundle this, and we are physically receiving 90,000 in cash, and we've suffered expenses of 10. So we've identified the transaction price to be 100,000. That's the point. We've identified the transaction price to be 100,000. And within that, the revenue for the kit is in the standalone proportion. So it's 60 1/50ths of the 100. So the majority of people were saying 40,000, and they were correct. And that's how they've worked it out. Now, the rest of the credit relates to the exam marking service, which is effectively deferred income. That will be a current liability, and that is revenue that we will recognize in the next accounting period. So there's a big matching concept when it comes down to IFRS 15. Good. Yeah, I'm happy with the first example. I'm happy with that shopping as well. That shopping looks to be creating a potentially lovely meal. And here we've got a second situation, and it's a second Here we've got a second situation, and it's a second situation that I would like you to please spend a few moments reading whilst you think about what is going on here. So 2 minutes, please. Can you please read this information? Now, to begin with, the information is very, very familiar, is repetitious. It's 10 million this time, and we charge 10%. Now, the reason for the 10 million being raised, the reason for the 10 million is that it's to do with a new class of non-voting B shares. And Man United have got sort of non-voting B shares, which they list on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, the existing Class A shares carry voting rights, so we're going to keep the existing owners are going to keep control. Dividends are payable on the B shares if and only if dividends are paid on the A shares. And the terms of the B shares are that it's then the dividend is payable at a rate equal to the A shares. And the Class B shares contain a call option, which allows Clendon to redeem within a 5-year period. So the company itself has the ability to call and to redeem the shares, has the ability to. It is allowed to call. It's not a put option, so the power is with Clendon rather than with the existing shareholders, rather than with the Class B shareholders. So I suppose there's a number of questions that fall to be considered here. This is a crowd funding exercise. And the first issue, I suppose, that falls to be considered, we've received some money. Why have we received all that money? Which standard is involved? What's the principles? Where are we going to credit? This isn't revenue, is it? No, it's not revenue. You know, we're back into financial instruments. You know, we've issued a Class B share we've issued a Class B share, and the philosophical issue is whether this is debt or whether this is equity. Now, I know what I like. I like equity. You know, if we call it debt, my balance sheet is ugly. If we call it debt, gearing goes up. If we call it debt, there's a finance cost, profits go down. If we call it debt, ugh. If we call it equity, gearing goes down. If we call it equity, our balance sheet is strengthened. If we call it equity, it's cheaper and easier to borrow money. If we call it equity and we pay them a dividend, there's no expense charged in the P&L. So our earnings are maintained, our profits are maintained. So normally, everybody likes equity. Equity does dilute existing shareholders, I know. But you know what? As an ethical accountant, we should be making the decision as to the accounting treatment based on the information provided, not on what's better. What do you think? What do you think? Is this debt or is this equity? Debt. Grace says debt. Wenjar says debt. Grace says redeemable shares. VJack says equity. VJack is saying that only to the hosts and the panelists, though, but you can say that to everybody if you want to, VJack. Okay, so this is worth discussing because on one level, I don't care whether you get the answer right or wrong. You know, on one level, I don't care about the conclusion. It's worth a mark. The low-hanging fruit, the initial mark, can all be gained, whether you get the answer right or wrong, with the definitions. So equity. So you know, in an exam, I would be writing the monies received are in respect of a financial instrument that we've issued, and we have to make a judgment following substance as to whether this is debt or equity, full stop. Debt will contain an obligation to repay the monies. Equity is evidence of ownership interest. Now, if I write that out word for word, 1 mark, 2 marks, maybe. It's a scene setter. And now I begin to look at the facts. Dividends are payable on the B shares if and only if dividends have been paid on the A shares. Do we have an obligation to pay a dividend to the B holder shares, yes or no? Do we have a dividend to pay? Do we have an obligation to pay the dividend to the B shareholders, yes or no? Do we have an obligation, yes or no? Correct. We don't have an obligation. Why don't we have an obligation? Because we don't have an obligation to pay it to the A shareholders, because the A shareholders are equity. If they're equity, there is no obligation to pay them to the A shareholders. And because there's no obligation to pay them to the A shareholders, therefore there's no obligation to pay them to the B shareholders. So there is no obligation to pay a dividend. That needs to be explained. That needs to be articulated. Clendon is not under any obligation to pay a dividend to the B shareholders because there is no obligation to pay a dividend to the A shareholders. Boom. End of. Call option. Does Clendon have to redeem the shares? Does Clendon have to redeem the shares? Yes or no? Does Clendon have an obligation to redeem the shares? Yes or no? Can the shareholders force Clendon to redeem the shares? Yes or no? Correct. Clendon is under no obligation to redeem the shares. No obligation. It can if it wants to. It has a call option. So Clendon can call the shares back, but they can't put them back on me. If they can put them back on me, I would have an obligation to pay them the money back. But I am allowed to, if I want to call them back, but I don't have to call them back. So I am under no obligation to redeem these shares. So we've established there's no obligation to pay a dividend. We've established there's no obligation to pay the money back. Are these shares debt or equity? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Correct. Can you see the way I've constructed that argument? Can you see the way that I've analyzed that situation? I've got a definition. I've started with an explanation of the definition. What is debt? You know, the issue we're dealing with here is debt or equity. This is debt, this is equity. And these are the clues in the question. And these are the way they are pointing. And therefore, I have my conclusion. Now, I'm hoping the slides that we're about to see will kind of validate the explanation. All right. So the issue is about raising finance. It is about debt or equity. Yeah. There is no obligation to pay a dividend. That implies it's equity. Although there is an option, there's no obligation to redeem. So the conclusion is equity. So forgive me for not writing it out, but I've talked my way through it. That's a bit of an answer plan. And you can see how that could easily be a 5-mark exercise. Two down, one to go. Another example of crowdfunding. That's a bit of street art. That's a bit of street art, which I rather liked. And there's some chaps sitting there in the foreground. So here we go. Here we go. 2 minutes. RTQ. 2 minutes. RTQ. Read the question. The question is a question that's been asked. Can we use the non-voting item as a point to say that it's a debt? No. The fact that there is non-voting is a bit of a red herring, a bit of a distraction. You can have non-voting equity. I suppose on its own it would imply debt, but it's not it's a make weight. If it was for 6, 7, 8 marks, maybe bring it in. But it's a further, I suppose it is a further carry. Debt won't carry a vote, all right? But equity may or may not carry a vote. So the fact that it doesn't have a vote doesn't help you in that ultimate distinction as to whether it's debt or equity. So we've got a very, very familiar situation here. We've got, this time it's 20 million. Again, there's 10% being charged. It's a Class C share. And in the Class C share, there is a fixed rate of dividend being paid. And there's a prohibition around paying dividends on the A until the fixed dividend has been paid. The Class C shares contain a put option that require payment of the initial investment. Right, okay. So once again, we have the basic intellectual process that we need to go through. And those are the questions effectively we've got to ask ourselves. And we've got to think about the issue of the financial instrument. That's what it is. We've got to think about whether it's debt or equity. And what do you think? What do you think? Debt or equity? Hey, Bobby. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. Hey. How lovely. You're getting there. This is progress. You've got the right conclusion. We can see it's debt. But remember, in constructing the argument, to go back to basics, say the simple things. The crowdfunding is in substance issuing a financial instrument. This financial instrument is either debt or equity. Debt contains an obligation to pay the money back. Equity is evidence of ownership interest. These Class C shares, we have an obligation to make regular payments. That's in the nature of debt. Yeah, there isn't clear obligation to pay a fixed rate. So that is a finance cost that will be charged in the P&L. Now the investors have the option which allows them to get their money back. So we have an obligation to the investors. That's why it's debt, probably a non-current liability. So yeah, it's an obligation. It's a fixed rate. That is a characteristic of debt. Fixed rate, conclusion, it's debt. And what we're doing there, even though a lawyer says it's called a share, what we're saying is we're faithfully representing what's going on. Yeah, and gearing will rise, profits will fall. There's an expense involved. So well done. Yeah, that's 3 sort of separate analytical examples that we've gone through in respect of debt and equity. Crowdfunding. Okay, let's change gear. We are going to have a Q&A session. At the end. So in about half an hour's time, there will be an opportunity just for general questions. I'll sort of finish sort of at 10 past, quarter past, to allow a 15-minute opportunity for Q&As. But this is a little section now about basic exam technique. This slide is trying to make a question fit to an answer. That's the wrong way around. You cannot go into the exam with the answer already in your head and expect to be asked that question, and then you just repeat what's in your head. Just because you see the word impairment doesn't mean to say you write out everything you know about impairment. It may only be worth 2 marks. And if it's the impairment of goodwill, then you've got to talk about cash generating units, how you measure NCI. Do not talk about reversal of impairment losses on goodwill. Do not talk about impairment losses being charged to equity with goodwill. Make sure that you answer the question you are set. Yeah, you cannot make the question fit a preconceived answer. These exams are always original. I've shown you me working on the practice platform. And you noticed that what I was doing was saying, look, it's worth 5 marks, so let's spend 8 minutes on it. It's worth 5 marks. Let's try and say 5 things. If you're going to do this exam and you're going to be marked out of 75 or marked out of 80 because you didn't finish the exam, because you ran out of time, I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Everyone has the same amount of time. You've got to be professional enough to manage your time so that you answer every part of the question, every part of the exam. You need to be marked out of 95. You need to be marked out of 100 to pass this exam. It's difficult enough to pass. But if you're going to be marked out of 80 or 85 marks and still expect to get 50, boy, you're just making life really, really hard for yourself. So time management is crucial. That's why you need to always intuitively convert the number of marks into the amount of time and move on. And move on. If your favorite topic comes up and it's for 5 marks, sorry, it's only 8 minutes. You can only get 5 out of 5. The markers max out. You know, sustainability reporting, there might be 8 or 10 things that you know about it and you can say, but if it's for 5 marks, the maximum number of marks you can earn is 5. And the examiners, the markers can give, you know, can give marks for lots of different things. They know there's 10 marks. People have written theses on these things. But in an exam scenario, you've got to answer the question within the time allowed and tailor the length of your marks accordingly. You saw the planning that we've put into answering questions. You saw that I was writing out little headings when I was in that exam scenario. Yeah, Appendix 1, Appendix 2, you know, revenue, borrowing costs. I set out the headings and then I backfilled. Don't do that in the scratch pad because the marker never sees the scratch pad. Do that on the action answer. You can always edit it. You've seen me edit it. And you know this is a classic approach. And you saw me apply that in the context of crowdfunding. You identify the issue being involved. You know, there are situations where the answer is it's a lease, but there's no reference in the question to it being a lease because you've got an agreement to, you know, whatever. So you've, you know, there are answers in the there are answers where you're making a provision or it's an impairment loss, but the word provision or the word impairment isn't in the requirement of the question. So you would get a mark in those situations for actually identifying that this is the area of ground that we're talking about. Don't just give the definition word for word for word for word for word. Soften it. Use the name of the business. You know, Tom has an impairment loss because, you know, Tom would recognize an impairment loss where the carrying value of his machinery, yeah, is greater than the amount that is recoverable from that asset. Show application. The information within the question is always relevant. So you're bringing it in, synthesizing it, and then reaching a conclusion. Mini paragraphs. You've seen me do it. You know, one of the things I do is I produce my own answers. So even when I'm debriefing my students on my courses and we're working an exam question, they're gaining access to my answer, which there's a Venn diagram with the examiner's answer, but my answers are always written with 1 mark in mind. And if it's a 5 mark question, I try and say 5 things. If it's a 3-mark question, I try and say 3 things. I try and align my answer as closely as I can to the marking guide. And I write my answers blind, and then I peek at the examiner's answers. And occasionally I kind of change things a little bit around. But you've already got access to the examiner's answer. And sometimes I find them quite dense. Sometimes I find them quite heavy. Sometimes I know that I couldn't copy it out within the time allowed. And I know that the examiner's answers are not worth 55 marks. You want to pass this exam. I think every single one of you would settle today on passing it with 55 marks. But trust me, if you pass it with 55 marks, your answer doesn't look like the examiner's answer. The examiner's answers is technically perfect. It's too long. It's technically spot on. Can contain references which you can't carry in your head, for which there are no marks in the marking guide. So don't beat yourself up. Don't be hard on yourself when you produce an answer and then compare it to the examiner's answer and think that's not good enough. Yeah, because you can never produce an answer of the quality, of the depth, of the polish of the examiner's answer. No one gets 100% in this SBR exam. A couple of my students got in the late 80s in December, 85, 86. Very good marks, very good students. Took on board the feedback, did all the work, and they were super bright and super hardworking. But plenty of my students got 50, 55. Not everybody passes, of course. I can't control that, but the resources are there. The resources are there. This is the way to pass the exam. Yeah, this is the way to answer 1 mark at a time. I know some of you are capable of multitasking, but you know, I want to kiss. I want to kiss. Yeah, I want to keep it simple. I said earlier, you're not a bookkeeper. I said earlier, you're not a person who's preparing the accounts. You're an expert. You're a highly paid finance director. You're operating at a good level. That's the idea of the exam. That's what we're preparing you for. It's a low-level skill to be able to spell. It's a low-level skill to be able to add up. It's a low-level skill to be able to use Google to regurgitate a definition. Application, application, application. Right, there are 3 scenarios here. Let's have a look at them for 1 minute. Can you look at them for 1 minute, please, without using the chat box? Scenario number 1. Scenario number 1 relates to management, cell, PPE. What is that triggering in your mind? What area of the syllabus of the exam? AHFS, assets held for sale. IFRS 5, assets held for sale and discontinued operations. Absolutely. Yeah, the keyboard warriors are there. All right. So the clue is they decide to sell the asset. So you've then got to know that to be held for sale, there has to be a commitment, there has to be an active plan, has to be in a suitable condition for immediate sale. Yeah, has to be capable of being sold within a reasonable expectation. Highly probable that it's going to be sold within 12 months. Yeah, so it can't be damaged. All of those conditions have to exist at the year end. So you're analyzing the facts. Green credentials, what's that about? What's green credentials about? I mean, sustainability maybe, but what's the idea about having green credentials when you've recently installed an oil rig? What's that about? Correct. Correct. I love it. There's some people here very quick on the keyboard. Provisions. Because the act of installing a facility in the oil industry, yeah, which has a shelf life because the oil gets exhausted, the economic reality is that under ISA 37, if you've got green credentials, you've raised a valid expectation that you are going to be decommissioning that. So you should recognize that liability in full. You should capitalize it. Yeah, you should measure it at present value because it's not going to be decommissioned for 20 years. So it's going to cost you 100 million in 20 years. So you recognize the liability of 100 million, but you discount it back in today's monetary terms. Just like installation costs are capitalized, so decommissioning costs are capitalized. So you set it up as an asset, debit the asset, credit the provision. The asset gets depreciated and the provision gets unwound because you've measured it at present value. So there will be subsequently be a finance cost. So yeah, I mean, I've seen that examined before and I'll see it examined again in my lifetime. And yet I know it's something that's taught at FR as well. There is an overlap. You've got to know your basics. What do we think about the guarantee? What do we think about the guarantee? The company has guaranteed a loan taken out by the director. What do we think about that? ISA 24 is a related party transaction. Yeah, any transaction between the company and its directors is automatically a related party transaction, automatically. Because directors are members of the key management. I mean, as indeed related parties include members of their close family. What about the fact there's no consideration? Does that matter? Because if the company has guaranteed the loan, no money's changed hands, the company has simply issued a guarantee. Does that mean we don't have to disclose it because there's no money transaction? You would still have to disclose it. You would still have to disclose it, even though there is no money in or money out on behalf of the company. I would also suggest that the guarantee is a financial instrument. And although it's probable the director won't default, that the issue of a guarantee is a financial liability, which should initially be measured at fair value. So I would also not only bring in related parties, but I would also bring in financial instruments and say it's a liability. I might also bring in ethics. If this was question 2, I would question what was going on. The directors are supposed to make the company act in the best interest of the company. Why is it in the best interest of the company to guarantee a loan, personal loan taken out by the director? I just don't get it. I think the director's on a scam. I think the director is pulling the wool over people's eyes. So I think that's unethical, an abuse of power. Yeah. There may be no money changing hands, doesn't matter. It may be a relatively small sum of money, doesn't matter. It's a transaction with a director, and therefore materiality kicks in at the level of a director. You're doing revision. All right. The exam is but a few weeks away. If you had 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours to pass this exam, you might feel a bit more confident. And what that would mean is that you have the knowledge to pass the exam, but because you're being restricted by 3¼ hours, that's the problem. Well, once you realize that's the problem, stop learning. Stop taking on board more information. You can have TMI. The factor that's missing, the limiting factor for the vast majority of students who've done work, who've studied, is not that they don't know enough, the issue is they're not skilled at applying it within the time allowed. And again, I'm going to be a bit boring here and repeat myself. You need to be familiar with the practice platform. You need to be familiar with the practice platform. It needs to be your home ground. Because if you feel you're playing away, you're lacking in confidence. So you've got to practice on the practice platform. Promise me you all will do that. Yeah? Do questions to time. And if you want to do a mock exam that I have written, if you want to do a mock exam that I have written on the ACCA practice platform, I do sell that, but I'm offering you an opportunity to enter into a prize draw. I will be advertising that prize draw both on my LinkedIn account and on my Instagram account. So if you connect with me today on Instagram, Tom_Clendon, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, Tom Clendon, if you connect with me, you will be able to enter the draw to get a free mock exam, which will be marked, giving you feedback, and will significantly increase your chances of passing. Time management. Yeah, because the way to improve your time management is practice. How does a sprinter get faster? They sprint. How does a footballer get match fit? They play matches. Yeah, it's not rocket science. Yeah, nobody learnt to pass a driving test by reading a book on how to drive, or dare I even say it, watching a YouTube on how to drive. You pass a driving test by practicing driving, ideally in the very same car that you're going to take your test in. You get the analogy I'm making here. You practice on the ACCA practice platform, yeah, not on pen and paper. This is not how you're going to be answering it in the exam. So you've got to build up your keyboard skills, your presentation skills, your ability to manipulate the windows within the practice platform. You see the style that I have evolved, which is to have the requirement in the body of the question, in the body of the answer, control copy, control C, copy paste. So I can see the requirement the whole time. I don't go back and delete it. Always easier going to be gaining a few marks from the next part of the question. I know something will come up in the exam that you love and you're going to get 5 out of 5 out of it, but you've got to walk away from it maybe when you've got 4. Because students pass or fail this exam not on their strengths, but on their weaknesses. Students pass or fail this exam based on scrabbling around, earning a few marks on a cash flow question, on a deferred tax question, when really they know very, very little and it's hit their blind spot. But if it's for 5 marks or 10 marks and you write nothing, I guarantee you'll get no marks. But if you just write something, a definition, you pick up some point in the question and you discuss it, even if it may not be as coherent as you would like, even though it may not be worth 5 marks, if you write a sentence or 2 sentences, you're giving yourself an opportunity to earn that mark. Because if you get 0 out of 5 or 0 out of 10, it's really hard to pass. You want to be able to get 1 mark, 2 marks. You don't have to pass every single part of every single question. You could get, 15 marks out of 25, 10 marks out of 25, 15 marks out of 25, 10 marks out of 25. So you could ultimately only pass 2 of the 4 questions, but still get 50. Not many students get 20 out of 25. In fact, sadly, some of the students who get 20 out of 25 for question 1 end up failing the exam because they've clearly spent an hour and a half, 2 hours on groups. And some would argue you shouldn't do question 1 first. I don't mind. I don't mind what you do first. I know what I would do first. I'd do my favorite question first. So if I did my favorite question first, I would feel good at the beginning of the exam, an hour into the exam, 45 minutes into the exam. Done that, got some marks under the belt, made a good impression, settled my nerves, I've started well. And for me, well, I suppose on one level, it doesn't really matter because I'm not doing the exams, all a bit hypothetical. But actually, I quite like the ethics question. Yeah, I quite like the groups question, but I quite like the ethics questions too. Develop your own exam technique. You do not have to do question 1 first just because it's called question 1. You do not have to do question 4 last just because it's called question 4. You do the questions in the order that you want to do them in, but don't spend time faffing around reading the whole thing before you start. Make a decision. They're all compulsory questions. Practice this technique. Practice this technique. Time is short. Time is short. Ooh, let's have a surprise. We have taken out a 5-year interest-free euro loan from the European Union, from a government body. What are the accounting issues involved? Please, can you use the chat box? There's more than one. I don't care the order in which you think about them. Are we getting tired? So there's a little bit of foreign currency in there, yes, because in the exam, you're dealing in dollars. So if you have borrowed in euros, one of the issues is that you have a foreign currency. So what you've got here is an FX loan. So this is a monetary item, and therefore you would look to retranslate, and you would take the exchange difference to P&L. So surely there's a couple of marks there for identifying that euros are not our functional currency. Our functional currency is the dollar. We've borrowed money in another currency. Therefore, that would need to be retranslated back into our functional currency. It would have to be retranslated every year as a monetary item. And the exchange difference, whether it's a gain or a loss, would go to the P&L. And strictly speaking, would be part of the finance cost. Yeah, strictly speaking, would be part of the finance cost. Excellent. Oh, thank you, Wasami. Thank you, Wasam. Thank you. Yeah, I would love an interest-free loan, wouldn't you? I know interest rates are not very high at the moment, but I would love an interest-free loan. So the fact that we have received money from a government on favorable terms is a subsidy. The fact that we have, in substance, this is a government grant. So it's ISA 20, ISA 40, ISA 40, ISA 20, ISA 20, ISA 40 is investment property, isn't it? ISA 20, yeah? So it's a government grant, yeah? Because the money we receive, we debit cash, yeah? The money we receive, we debit cash, and let's say we debit cash 100, but we've got an obligation to pay the cash back in 5 years' time as a single payment, so there's no interest going on. So the obligation will be measured at fair value. The obligation will be measured at fair value at, say, 90. I'm clearly making the figures up. And therefore, you've got a benefit. You've got a grant. You've got a grant of the balancing figure. And then it's up to you then to work out whether that grant as a balancing figure is a capital grant or a revenue grant. Now, assuming it's a capital grant, you then leak it through the P&L over the 5-year period or over the period of the benefit. Assuming if it was a revenue grant, which is probably unlikely, you'd recognize it in the P&L straight away. So again, there's a couple of marks there. So we can talk about foreign currency. We can talk about the grant nature of it. I think we can also talk about the fact that it's a financial instrument and that as a liability, it ends up being measured at initial recognition at fair value. And then the accounting for it will be at amortized cost. So there will actually be a finance cost as we unwind the discount. There will actually be a finance cost as we unwind the discount on the liability. Yeah, there will be. So there's a whole area there. So look, you know, you could even get in talking about fair values if you wanted to, because we've actually identified the fair value, the initial recognition of the liability at fair value. So yeah, if the question is for 8 marks, what are we doing here? Initial recognition is at fair value. So you would not measure it at the cash you've received, but at the present value of the one-off payment that you're going to pay back. There's an unwinding of the discount. It's a liability. It's at amortized cost. It's also a government grant because you've got a benefit, and it's also to do with a foreign currency. Now, there's a question I'm asked every time I do one of these sessions. Are there any marks available for remembering and quoting the number of the accounting standard? No, there isn't. There are no marks available for identifying the issue. Yeah, there are no marks available for remembering the name or number of the standard. So it's not worthwhile memorizing that. Don't stress yourself out. If you like, that's why they're in brackets. That's the technical knowledge, 2 marks each. Spin it up, spin it round, fill it up, and that's fine. Maybe this is slightly patronizing. In a way, I hope it is. In a way, I hope you already know how to revise. But it is about doing past examination questions. And I think instead of working from a kit, instead of working from a book, I think you should work on the ACCA practice platform doing past examination questions. Obviously, students that I teach have access to other questions as well, but that's another story. If you've got a study buddy, if you've got a tutor who marks your work, take advantage of them. If you've signed up with a tuition provider, you should be using your tutor, to mark, get them. If you've paid them money, and you've done some work, do the homework that they set you, get them to mark it so that you've got that opportunity of feedback and reflection. If you haven't got a tuition provider, try and have a friend to read your answer and to help you reflect on what you've done well and what you could do to improve. Remember about the white space. Remember about the length of your answers. Do a bit of reading. There's some good articles on the ACCA website. Do some reading. Do some listening. I have talked to you about my podcasts. My podcasts. They're available on Spotify. They're available on Google websites. They are free. I have people tell me that they listen to me driving, in the gym, running. They're 10 minutes. 10 minutes on deferred tax, bosh. 10 minutes on leasing, bosh. 10 minutes on sustainability, bosh. Just a little refresher. Not quite the same as you doing a question, but it's better than nothing. Have I talked about the ACCA practice platform? I think I have. What if it's just ourselves marking? Life is tough. Life is tough. It's easier if a tutor marks your work. It's easier if you have a study buddy who may be a fellow student or maybe somebody who's recently qualified who looks at your work, because somebody fresh looking at your work can sometimes see things that you can't. You've got to try and be critical about your own work. You've got to have a hunger to improve. You've got to have a confidence to be vulnerable. Someone's listening when you're... Is that drinking or driving? Drinking your morning coffee. Thank you. Well, I hope the coffee keeps you awake. And I've referred to the ideal of having a study buddy. I know when I was a student, when I was an ACCA student, I studied with my mate Nick, who I worked with at the time, and we used to go to college together. It was tiring because we'd spend all day at work, and then we'd go to college. And he was better than me at financial management, and I was better than he was at audit. So we studied together. I say those two things because they stand out. And we would go for a drink. We would go for some food and a drink after the class, just to unwind. And sometimes we'd talk about football, and sometimes talk about the class. And if it was financial management, he would sort of basically teach me again. He would say, WACC, cost of capital, post-tax. He'd understood it. So I can remember him teaching me again. Now clearly I benefited from that experience because he was telling me the information. And when the following year, when we were doing audit, and he struggled with the concepts around audit, and I would re-explain to him, he was benefiting. But I know, as an educator, that the real person who learns the most is the teacher. So when Nick was explaining to me about financial management, he was learning more than I was, because he was having to reorder his thoughts in his head, articulate them in his own words, and create an output. That's what you do in the exam. The exam is not a test of how much you've input, but whether you can explain an output. So I was benefiting my audit. I got my top mark in audit. I was benefiting more by teaching him. So study buddy, don't think of it. If you team up with someone else and you're the stronger partner, don't think of it you're helping them as much as you are helping yourself get even stronger. Now, I do have some more things that I want to say briefly, but time management being what it is, I'm wondering if there are further questions. When reviewing notes, are we trying to fix up the mistakes identified in our practicing after marking, also as a way of refreshing our memory? Yes. Yes, you're trying to reflect on the structure of your answer. Does it have a beginning, middle, and end? You're trying to make sure that there is white space. You're trying to pick up on keywords. All right, keywords, and keywords in ethics will be about the principles. Have you tied them in? That's how professional marks are often awarded. Professional marks are often awarded by tying in the ethics, the principle, into the case. You don't copy out the 5 pillars. You don't copy out the 5 pillars. My sister, so I'm one of 6, and I'm number 5. So I've got a sister who's older than me, and she's a granny. So my sister is a granny. So that means that my nephew is a father, her son is a father, and that means I'm a great uncle. All right. And my nephew who lives around the corner, he's got 4 kids now. And the youngest, Louis, is a couple of years old and he's beginning to talk. And I can either say to him, what's your name? Or I can either say to him, how old are you? And he knows the answer. Well, the other day, I said to him, Louis, how old are you? And he said, my name is Louis. And I failed him. Because although what he was saying was factually correct, he wasn't answering the question. And I go back to this point about Google, we need subtle applied answers. So I hope that addresses that point, Bobby. We all make mistakes, but it's about the way that you're communicating, you're trying to pick up on those points. How to earn professional marks. Professional marks are always there in question 2. And within question 2, it's to do with 2 things: tying in the principles to the case. So correctly identifying and justifying why integrity is at stake, for example. And I showed you how to do that. I tried to show you how to do that, the little heading and calling things out specifically. And then secondly, even if the question doesn't particularly ask you to get involved in actions. Get involved in actions. If you go to a doctor and the doctor diagnoses you with bad arm or smoking or I don't know. The diagnosis is not the full answer. You've gone to a professional, so it's not just good enough for us to point out you're unfit, you're ill, you're unethical. It's surely incumbent upon us to say, well, resign, get out of there, do some training, talk to your boss, have a dialogue, have a conversation. This is bullying. You need to call on actions. So professional marks, particularly in ethics, are often tied to do with making sure that you're applying the principles of ethics and tying it into the case and talking about actions. So I hope that does that help you? Does that help you? Does that answer your question? Excellent. How do you deal with tricky questions? Okay, how do you deal with tricky questions? By doing what I'm doing now. Thinking. Pausing. And I draw comfort. You should draw comfort from the fact that if it's a tricky question for you, it will be a tricky question for everybody else. And your priority in the exam is to do what you can do. All right? So don't dwell on the tricky question. Put it to one side, move on. It's a discrete part A. It's a discrete part C. Move on. Don't dwell on it too long. Come back to it. And when you come back to it, you must write something. And maybe your brain at the back of your mind has come up with something, come up with a definition. Go back to basics. Go back to the framework. Go back to principles. Are they talking about an asset? Are they talking about an expense? Are they talking about a stakeholder? What is being asked? Why is it tricky? Guess. Write something down. If you guess wrong, there's no negative marking. There will be a tricky question in the exam. There will be a tricky question in the exam. There always is. And it will vary as to what an individual finds tricky. There is no student who walks out of the exam and says, none of it was tricky. So it's how you deal with those tricky points. Yeah. If you ignore them, you're being marked out of 90, 85, 80. It's a disaster. You've got to have a go at them. But don't let them define you. Don't let that blow your confidence. Draw comfort from the fact that it's tricky for you. It's tricky for everybody else. It's meant to be a tricky exam. It's not just what's the debit, what's the credit. So you've got to believe in yourself, in other words. Yeah, you've got to believe in yourself. If you believe that it's true, if you believe you're going to pass, you're probably going to pass. But if you believe that you're going to fail, if you go into that exam with no belief, it's not going to happen for you. Yeah, boxers, footballers, sportsmen, they have to have belief. Is it necessary to write out, Sharon says, the definition of the standard? It's often the case that you'll get a mark at the beginning of a longish question for a definition, but make sure that you soften that definition, and you are simply not going to pass the exam by writing out definitions. So get stuck in straight away with applying the relevant criteria. Yeah, because, if it's about a provision, whether or not you're making a provision, and it's about whether or not there's a past obligating event, you need to hone in and concentrate on that. Yeah, you need to hone in and make sure you answer the question. So it's not necessary to write out the full definition. No, refer to the definition, bring the definition in, apply it, soften it. Doreen, how do you get the free mock? Well, I'm doing a draw. I haven't announced it yet, but I'm doing a draw. 2 draws. One on LinkedIn and one on Instagram. And it'll be early next week. So if you are on my Instagram account or you are on my LinkedIn account, you will have the ability to enter the draw, Doreen. Right? So you got to track me down on social media, Instagram, Tom_Clendon, S_SBR_lecturer. So you'll find me on Instagram if that's what you do. I'm there, and you'll find me on LinkedIn as well, Tom Clendon, easy. Bobby gives some good advice to Sharon there. Sharon, you are very polite in saying thank you. Not only must you believe yourself, yeah, but in answering questions, you need to keep it simple. Don't start making up numbers. Don't start bringing real life scenarios. Don't start, at work, this is what we do. Answer the question, keep it simple. Can we discuss about the subsidiary to associate, such as affected by diluted share? I'm not sure I fully understand the articulation of that question, but the distinction between a subsidiary and an associate is an important one, and it's a judgment one. It's not a number. So a subsidiary is control, and an associate is significant influence. And you normally have significant influence between 20 and 50%, but not always. You can have 40% and control the company. Maybe if you've got options, or maybe if you've got convertible loan notes, for example. So it is a judgment issue. It is a judgment issue that you can make and discuss the facts as we've talked about in the past. You've paid good money to enter the exam. You've given up 3 hours of your afternoon to tune in to listen to me. Yeah, go finish the job. Go finish the job. Leave no stone unturned. Have no regrets. Do your best. Fulfill your potential. You all have the ability to pass this exam. All right? So it is a question of application. It's a question of having that knowledge, having that application. You know how to reach me on social media. If I can be of any help to you, I mean, the main thing, to me, the two things at this stage, that I can help you with is to point you to my podcasts, which are free. Yeah. And if you did want to come on one of my mock exam courses, yeah, again, that I think would be very, very useful. That's a paid for service, but I'm offering 2 free ones through my LinkedIn account and Instagram account. But we're coming to the end of our session. And I hope and I wish you all the best in terms of luck. I'm sorry to hear that, Jeffrey. I'm sorry to hear that, Jeffrey. I think my advice is summarized in everything that I have been talking about in the last 3 hours. I said at the beginning, Jeffrey, if you're one of those resit students, you've got to do something different. Maybe doing my exam. Maybe doing my exam and getting me to market would be that difference. All right. But you are so close, 48. You clearly have the knowledge. Yeah, but it's going to be a different exam. It's going to be a different exam to the other 2 you've done. So you've got to go again, my friend. And I wish you all the best. The webinar has been recorded, and my friends and colleagues at ACCA will be responsible for distributing that to you, or distributing that link to you, and it will be emailed to you. Absolutely, it will be emailed. And do you get the recordings if you don't register? Well, you've registered, haven't you? You're here, you've registered. So because you've registered, you will be emailed and you will get the recording. So that's not a problem. but you're here, so you have registered. I don't understand that. Okay, all right, well, you may not then get the recording. I don't know how you're here if you didn't register, but whatever. I'm glad you attended, though. I hope you found it useful. And I'm going to say, have a nice weekend. Go on the practice platform. 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 Connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Connect with me on Instagram. Go on the practice platform. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Go on the practice platform. You know the messages I'm trying to get across, don't you? Good luck. Come on. Yeah, you can do this. I'm glad you thought it was a great session, Brian. That's very kind of you to say so. Yeah, God bless everybody, and thank you very much as well. Yeah, good luck and all the best. And thank you for inviting me to spend time in your home or in your coffee shop or wherever you happen to be in Malaysia. And I just wish I could be joining you now for some nasi goreng. I miss it so much. I lived out in Asia for so long. I spent so many times flying into KL and enjoying the food and enjoying all the different opportunities that KL had to offer. Really enjoyed going to Malaysia. Nasi lemak, yeah, nasi goreng, nasi lemak, all good stuff. I would love to come again. I will come again. When this pandemic is over, I will come again. Yeah, I'm hoping to come out again soon. All right. Take care. Thank you very much indeed. God bless.